London, where he advised institutional clients on financial matters, including financial strategy, corporate governance, etc. After 6 years in investment industry in UK, he moved to Pakistan, where he joined as a faculty of economics at LUMS. He also worked as economic advisor to Government of Punjab, Pakistan on matters relating to commerce and investment. Did a number of projects on UNICEF, FCO, etc. He has done a number of policy reports for the government, including National Industrial Policy for Pakistan, Economic Growth Strategy for Punjab, Private Sector Development Strategy for Punjab, Situation Analysis of Women and Children in Pakistan, and so on and so forth. Dr. Khan completed his education at Cambridge University, UK. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'll just start my presentation with a broad introduction of the paper that we've done. There's a team of researchers working at Lahore University of Management Sciences, which looked at agriculture after the MFN was actually delayed, when the agriculture sector actually raised voices against Pakistan granting MFN to India back in December 2012. The way we've done this paper is both used secondary research and done primary research, but primary research in way of contacting our key stakeholders and trying to listen to them what their concerns is. So the prime focus of our paper is actually putting in perspective the viewpoint of our key stakeholders in the agriculture sector. In doing so, we've framed our questions, or framed our research in answering two types of questions. One, looking at how realistic is the threat from the subsidy that India gives to the agriculture sector, and second is about market access. So I'll go through some of the slides. I'll skip some as well and talk more about the important issues that were identified. I mean, there's no denying that Indian agriculture sector is much larger than Pakistan. I mean, broad estimates suggest it's about 5 times the sector. India's sector is 5 times larger as compared to Pakistan's sector. Growth dynamics, we looked at some of the growth numbers. Indian sector being a bit large, it is also much more volatile as compared to Pakistan. In terms of key commodities, there isn't much difference in terms of the key products that are being actually produced, both in Pakistan and India. In terms of exports, Pakistan's exports are fairly limited to rice, whereas India has a much more diversified exports in agriculture sector. In terms of imports, both countries import mostly palm oil and is their biggest sort of import in agriculture sector. I'll just skip through these slides and get to the important ones. Okay. So the two key questions that we wanted to answer through our sort of stakeholder consultations. So one is the threat, which is importation of subsidized products from India. This table shows some of the figures in terms of the subsidies that are given in terms of fertilizer, electricity, and irrigation. I'm sure there's been some talk on this earlier as well, and there's been these numbers have been quoted. If we convert these into some differentials, DAP, which is one of the key fertilizer, India is about 36% cheaper, urea about 70% cheaper. In terms of electricity, about 133% cheaper. Diesel is also cheaper in India. So broadly, there are cost advantages in terms of cost of production and of key inputs that go into agriculture production sector. We also did some analysis of point-in-time price analysis, although we couldn't really draw any significant conclusion based on the price differentials. But here we need to understand one thing, and to explain this point a bit more carefully. What we identified in terms of stakeholder discussions was it wasn't the case that India was subsidizing and as a result we would struggle in terms of that. Most of the things that came out in our sort of discussions with the stakeholders were mostly internal factors. When it comes to prices, there's a lot of difference between farm gate prices and the wholesale or the market prices in terms of agriculture produce. And that is the reason, and the reason for that is that the middle market in Pakistan is fairly strong, and the profit margins there are significantly high. So those are internal matters. So even if there's a cheaper product that is coming from India, by the time it ends up with the consumer still ends up paying a pretty much higher price because of that particular trader in the middle. So those are sort of internal issues that needs to be addressed internally. In terms of talking about key crops, I mean, this particular table shows production per capita in India of some of the key crops, and then also the amount that India actually exports to world. So apart from rice, cotton, and maize, there's hardly any export that India does to world. So as a result, we found that, and we discussed with our stakeholders, that within these particular within these particular commodities, there isn't that much of a threat because these products will not sort of flood into Pakistani markets. However, where we found a bit of problem was that back in 2012 there was a special allowance of fresh vegetables coming into Pakistan through the Wagah border. Now that has had, the purpose of that particular SRO was to actually control food inflation and cheap sort of fresh vegetables coming in from India. I mean, there has been a limited impact in terms of controlling prices as a result of this SRO, but at that particular point in time, there was a lot of emphasis in Punjab, especially in Punjab, on tunnel farming. Now, there has been a direct impact of allowance of import of those fresh vegetables on tunnel farming, and the acreage have reduced from about 55,000 to somewhere about 25 to 30,000 acres only. Now, that has a significant impact where sort of cheaper imports from India in terms of those fresh vegetables have had an impact on the local agriculture sector. For example, in 2012, there's about $120 million worth of tomatoes that were imported. Now they've captured markets up to Lahore. Now Pakistan, I mean Lahore was initially getting tomatoes that were produced in Mansehra and sort of up north, and those tomatoes were still selling at much lower prices in those particular areas, and most of the production was actually wasted simply because the cost of transporting them was actually higher, and as a result all of that production went to waste, which was actually being consumed within Punjab prior to this particular facility. However, this had happened before the talk on MFN had actually started, so there's nothing to do with MFN. What we found in terms of our discussion was that restrictiveness by India in terms of allowing market access is actually a bigger issue than having the threat of subsidized products coming into the Pakistani market. Here we've shown the basic overall trade restrictiveness index calculated by the World Bank. As you can see that in India's OTRI is much higher as compared to Pakistan's. In terms of non-tariff barriers, most of them have actually been reduced, but there's still some information gaps, knowledge flows that actually restrict trade happening on ground. A specific example of that relates to export of potatoes from Pakistan to India. We spoke to our sort of potato growers, and back in February 2012, the price of potatoes in Pakistan was extremely low. It was about 2 to 3 rupees per kg, and there was a lot of quantity that was actually produced, but still the potato growers were unable to actually export any potato to India. I spoke to a couple of the growers, and they said that once they contacted the importers on the Indian side, they were told about some SPS compliance issues and quarantine issues or quarantine restrictions. However, when I checked the policy online, it said that only potatoes from South America are actually banned and all the other potatoes are allowed to be transported. But that actually showed that there was maybe an information flow that was not available, or there was an information gap that restricted that trade from happening. So what that points out is that, I mean, there's a lot of study that has been done, I think both at ICRIER and back at LUMS and in Pakistan as well, on identifying the broader non-tariff barriers. What we need to now do is to actually move into more sector-specific or product-specific non-tariff barriers and try to remove them in a more of a bilateral manner, so that those things which sort of comprise of informational issues or knowledge gaps are actually addressed doing that particular aspect. Then another element was that there's a policy which is still outstanding on visa issues, which keep on coming as a predominant non-tariff barrier. However, the policy as it was stated was that the businessman could get a visa for, I think, 5 cities or 6 cities on arrival, but visa for Punjab was excluded from that. Now, if a fruit grower or a vegetable grower has to export his fruit or vegetable, his immediate market would be through Wagah into Punjab. But if he's not allowed to get a business visa for Punjab, then that makes it much more difficult for him to actually contact his traders and his exporters. So there has to be some element in looking to those sort of non-tariff barriers as well. In terms of other issues, as I said, that what the paper actually brought about was that most of the issues that the sector actually face are internal rather than external. One is weak negotiation strategy by Pakistan. I mean, there's been, the recommendation has been that it should include direct stakeholders in all negotiations, improve analytical research capacity. Water is a big issue for Pakistan, so there needs to be a dialogue on Indus Water Treaty again. Energy shortage in Pakistan has been a critical issue. Vegetable sector needs protection against the onslaught from India after the SR in 2012. Now, maybe the intention at that particular point was to have price control, but what we've seen recently, and when we were working on the paper, we did some spot checks on prices as well. It hasn't really helped in controlling prices to that particular extent to what the government would have actually envisaged at that particular point in time. But now, given that trade is open, but there could be some checks in terms of to curb that impact of subsidized produced coming in. For example, if the claim is that because DAP and urea is cheaper and excessive use increases the yield, then Pakistan could actually enforce some quality standards on arsenic levels on fresh fruits and vegetables coming in. I mean, if the farmers are using high quantities of DAP and urea, the vegetables would have high levels of arsenic content, and that could act as a restraint to those particular vegetables which sort of benefit from that particular subsidy. Within an internal structure, the other problem is on poor governance in the agriculture sector relating to seed quality. Now, there are lots of companies that can actually sell seeds in Pakistan, and that actually affect the yield and the quality of the produce. The quality enforcement within Pakistan is particularly weak. In terms of market access, we did some RCA calculations as well, and Pakistan has comparative advantage in citrus, mango, fish, and some other sort of vegetables. But all of those products are actually either have very high bound tariff rates or are restricted through non-tariff barriers. So that limits the extent to which Pakistan can actually penetrate into the Indian market. Again, in terms of as a way forward, what we've suggested, I think a reference was made to that as well, that for agriculture, we need to leave it out of MFN and have more of a bilateral agreement on agriculture where the two sides can actually negotiate more of an amenable solution to the questions raised by the Pakistani side and what the Indian side has to say. And again, as I said, there are provisions that are available which sort of allow for having a specific bilateral trade agreement, both under WTO and even under SAFTA, because it mentions goods but not agriculture goods, so that could be taken as a precedent and sort of negotiate a bilateral trade agreement in SAFTA. So where we are in terms of our sort of approach in working with the agriculture sector in Pakistan is trying to work out the modalities of having more of a bilateral agreement on agriculture or a separate agreement on agriculture out of MFN, which can address the issues and concerns raised by the sector, some of which I have actually highlighted. Sorry, I just had to rush through my presentation because I just rushed from Lahore. It took me about 6-7 hours to get here, so I was a bit zonked out as well, so sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. This was very interesting, and I really appreciate your adventure coming all the way from Waghabad. Comparative advantage in citrus, mango, fish, etc., but that's where the tariffs are high. So market access is a bigger issue than a subsidy issue. That's interesting. We have 3 discussants with us now, and I would like to invite Mr. Syed Yawar Ali, who is currently the chairman of Nestle Pakistan Limited. May I comment on some global supply chains? That idea was because Nestle is on both sides of the border too, and a big player.
On the Indian side,
Yeah.
in Shampura on the
Yeah.
other side,
Yeah.
and the coal side is only about 100 kilometers between the two areas. I just like to touch on 2-3 points. One is this issue of the separate agreement for agriculture. And this is, I understand that this is being done in a number of countries for 2 very simple reasons. One, you have sensitivity of farmers and consumers and seasonality. Most of the countries, what they do is that they only allow imports when there's a shortage in their country. So it's a controlled or a time bound, as was described by Mr. Huda earlier. So this could be, I think, very seriously looked at, and this is something that can be workable. Secondly, I think somebody mentioned the standards, and I think this is a very key. If you're exporting or importing onions, what are the standards that need to be applied on both sides? My understanding is that when one country needs a short of onions, then the standards are relaxed and onions are allowed to come in. But I think these are very critical in the SPS standard especially. Thirdly, one I think was mentioned by Usman, actually the visa for the business is not restricted to East Punjab. It is the people who are over 65. They cannot travel to Punjab. They have to go across Punjab into Chandigarh and beyond. So if you get a business visa, it's not an issue with East Punjab. And in the case of Pakistan, it's more an open market. Perhaps in India, it's more a issue of the controlled market. But I think the opportunities lie in 2-3 areas. One is that Pakistan has large land holdings, and there are farms which go into hundreds and even up to 1,000 acres. So this can work together with the technology that has been developed here. It can start as a producing base for export to a third country. I think this is a good opportunity that can certainly be looked at. And one or two things, because I belong to the dairy sector, and I think the 30% duty on the dairy products is probably too high, and especially when India is the largest milk producer in the world. So there could be, if we have to trade, then at least the duties have to be lowered in certain areas. I understand that it's small farmers, they need to be protected, but I think if we are doing a bilateral or a separate arrangement for agriculture, these can be looked at. And the other one is, as mentioned in the fruits, that kinos and mangoes are two of our main product lines, and we have surpluses on them, but we are not allowed to export both of these. So again, a seasonality approach can be used, where the Indian mango season does not have to clash with the Indian mango season. It can extend the seasons of mangoes as well. So these are some of the areas that I'd like to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. Could I invite now Mr. Muhammad Tariq Bucha, who is the president of the Farmers Association in Pakistan, and he was also director of Punjab Water Council and has been chief executive, the Image Professionals. I hope you have the details.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great.
Before I comment, I think generally all the important points have been taken care of, and I don't want to repeat all of them. But I would like to make a sort of a statement here that if we want to move forward, we have to come out with a sustainable future of agriculture trade between the two countries. Because unless the feasibility of whole exercise has been taken properly and it is a win-win situation for both the countries, I think it will boomerang and will not work out at all. But on that note, I would also like to say that we are now very close to the way forward. And our two task forces have reached a lot of consensus in reaching a way forward where we are going to find out the way to begin trade rather than keep on thinking about how to do trade. And what we have done is to identify those crops, particularly in agriculture sector I'm talking about, where there is no competition between the two countries. So we can start that right away, like we are doing at the moment. We're getting soya bean, or somebody talked about isabgol, and then we can get cashew nuts or something like this. So there is no competition to Pakistan agriculture.